Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you once again, my very dear friend, Christopher RENSTROM. Now, you know Christopher, you've seen him on my channel before, and now he is coming back to Synchronicity University as well, this time with a 5-part course. You're about to see how this incredible author is just so brilliant. And for now, you've got just a little bit of time left to choose your tuition rate as low as just $5 a class. And you're about to learn a lot and watch a very fun conversation, I think. Well, Christopher, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be back. I've missed you.
I missed you too. You know, I adore you so much. And before the camera was on, I mean, a part of me is like, who cares about what happens before the camera is on, right? It's all about what happens once that camera is on. But yeah, I mean, Christopher and I have already been talking for a while because we just have so much fun. And I was like, let's just turn on the camera and bring that energy into this moment. We are starting off, Jill, with a little bit of a sad note, and that is someone that we both love, huge pop culture figure, Tina Turner, passed just shortly before we started recording. And so both of us are feeling that sadness and gratitude for her work. So I want to be sure to talk about her chart, and then of course talk about Christopher's books, talk about his course. So there's lots to get into here today. How are you doing, Christopher, especially in light of one of our great lights in the world, in the larger world, really, Tina Turner passing away? How are you feeling?
Sad, because she was so, in the 80s, it was all Tina Turner, and what we celebrated so much about her was this, you wanted to sort of say resurrection or rebirth, but it was actually emergence. It was actually birth. It was actually ascension of Tina Turner. I think one of the she was just such a champion spirit. I mean, first of all, she was this extraordinary performer. I mean, you just didn't want to be the act following Tina Turner, or maybe even on stage with Tina Turner, because she was just so fabulous and she was so great. And, speaking personally, I will always remember her as a member, being a member of the LGBTQ community. And the 80s was such a dark and challenging time with the AIDS crisis. There were people like Madonna and Tina Turner who spoke out and who really stood by the LGBTQ community. And so that's something I will always be grateful for her, personally, because that was a very dark and a very hard time in which no one was talking about it. And these two women, these two fabulous artists, these two icons really, and along with Elizabeth Taylor, really stepped forward. But her music spoke so much to people. Her spirit spoke so much to people. Her story spoke so much to people. And it's just, people talk about authentic artists. Authentic is such a pale word. She's the artist. I mean, she's the artist. And she was just so fantastic. And part of me is full of sorrow, but, I think of her and I smile. You can't help but smile, because that she is of the sort where the spirit lives forever, and just you're sad, but you have to smile soon, because she brought that kind of joy and that kind of ecstasy and that kind of spirit to her work. And it's an immortal spirit. It lives forever.
We are going to pull up her chart in just a moment, but when I think of her, this phrase comes to mind, and that is, you don't always know that you're in a cocoon until you break out as a butterfly.
Yeah.
Like you don't even know how small your world is sometimes until you move on to becoming the next version of you, or a something more, a different version of you, a greater version of you. And boy, did she do that in such a big way. And I know her story has inspired so many people in a lot of different ways, but especially that willingness to grow, that willingness to change, to break out of a situation that was, really detrimental to her soul,
Oh,
and to start anew, to start fresh. And the way in which she really became something else, where she owned her power in a way that it just was a shining example to women, definitely.
well, you saw the whole really story of like the women's liberation movement in the story of Tina Turner. I mean, she came from an oppressive marriage, but at the same time, an incredible collaboration. I mean, and that brings up questions that even the Me Too movement, it's just like, do you, not like the artist but embrace the art, or do you cancel both, or whatever? I mean, she really came out of this alchemical fusion with her husband that was awful. It was clearly awful, but at the same time, it really set into motion her artistry, not because he was directing it. I mean, it started out like that at first, but because that all went into the alchemical vase, and it I say reemerge, but really emerges as Tina, because once Tina Turner becomes Tina, it's inexhaustible. There's no defeating or standing up to that. It's like this, and but her story was the story of so many women, especially women of color, going through the 50s and the 60s, 70s, and then into the 80s, which was such an extraordinary time for women and the women's movement here in the United States of America. So it just, yeah, it's the butterfly emerging from the cocoon, and introducing us to iridescent colors that we are dazzled by, and moved and inspired by at the same time.
And changed by, possibly forever.
By.
So I'm going to pull up her chart now. When I look at Tina Turner's chart, I think, of course, this quintessential Sagittarius, right?
Right.
Everything about her, to me anyways, screamed Sagittarius. Her legs, her thighs, her
Right.
performances, her
Right.
spiritual journey,
Yeah.
her exploration of the world, her relocating to a different part of the world. I mean, just all of it. What are some things that jump out at you as you look at her chart?
Well, clearly the full moon. That it's a nighttime chart, and that she's born under a full moon. And so what you're seeing here is a very spirited side, but also the moon being in Gemini. There's another side that isn't quite sure of what, kind of like I would imagine say, where we're going, Tina. It's like not quite sure of like where we're going, because here, the Mercury ruling the full moon, which is apparent in the nighttime of the chart. It's almost like it's galloping away with that moon. I mean, that moon is just so powerful, and ultimately it will go to the sun in the Sagittarius, and it will end up with the Jupiter in Pisces. But it shows a side of her. We talk about the spirit and the vitality, but it also shows that there's a very canny side to her. Mercury ruled moons, and what I mean by that is Gemini or Virgo. These are very shrewd, emotional thinkers. These are people who think with their feelings, and they're very shrewd, and they're very clever, and they know how to size up a situation very quickly. And she was also a marketing genius, and marketers loved her. And when you're talking about marketing, you're also getting into the moon in Gemini as well. I don't know enough about her to know if she was a lyricist, if she wrote her own material or not. I would wonder if she did, because of that airy moon at the top of the chart. But when moons are very, very prominent, the public loves you. It's funny. A lot of times people think that the sun at the top of the chart is the public knowing you, and the sun at the top of the chart might be a very well-known name, or very well-known brand, as we might say, but it's the moon at the top of the chart that really I have found speaks to popularity in terms of people loving or flocking to someone. And the moon, of course, speaks about the common people. And so if you have a very powerful moon at the top of your chart, people recognize in your life their lives. And so they are very much drawn to you.
And, I mentioned the Sag part of her. It was her conversion to Buddhism that ended
Mhm.
up being a big part of that emergence from the cocoon. And I have found that people with strong Sagittarius signatures, she's got 3 planets there, the personal big planets
Really?
there in Sagittarius, they tend to decide for themselves what they believe based on their own experience, based on what works for them. They're not likely to just go along with what they've been told or how it is that the structures have always been, the traditions have always been. No, they have to figure it out and know it for themselves. And she was an incredible example of that as well.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that that shows up there what you not growing into herself is something that I can see is something that I will often see with nighttime charts, where the sun is under the horizon and then you have like a fire sign rising. So there's a very strong sense of who she is on the inside, but that might not, because the sun is under the horizon, might not have translated right away to the outside. There may have been, or there was, I would almost say, like an incubation period, where she's just hasn't, as you were saying, emerged from herself. But what's also extraordinary to see here too is that the midheaven is Taurus. It's ruled by the Venus, which is in Sagittarius. But what I also like to use in chart reading is the planetary joys. And the fifth house, of course, is the house of arts and entertainment. It's also the house of sports. And it's definitely the house of delights. So to see this ruler of the midheaven, her destiny, Venus, appearing in the house where she rejoices, is also a very, very powerful message of the chart. This is what's really showing us someone who, and all you had to do was watch her perform. I mean, like, she gets carried away in the music and in the moment, and she gives things that, I mean, it's our term right nowadays is kind of like, there was a phrase a few years ago, going to church. She would bring the church or whatever. Well, she brought that into her performances where people would, get up and practically want to get on stage with her, and so that's very much that Venus, which is rejoicing in the Sagittarius. But at the same time, what's fascinating is to see, and I would love to see your opinion on this, Nadiya, the benefics squaring one another. How that might strike you.
So I tend to think that, look, there's a theory that benefics are always good, even if they're in a square. But I think squares are activity. They mean that you're doing the work. And because you're doing the work, you're likely to reap a lot of reward as a result of that effort that you take. Like, you do the things that success requires. And especially in this case, you do the things that allow you to maximize the potential of the benefits as well. And going
Mhm,
back to this idea, both are Jupiter ruled signs.
mhm,
They're both oriented around faith and belief. And
mhm,
I feel that this is her really doing the work, not only, of course, to understand what her religious beliefs are going to be, but in a
mhm,
larger sense, like, what is the higher spiritual purpose of her incarnation? What is she connected to in a larger sense? What's fueling her in a larger sense? I think all of that comes together in that square really powerfully.
yeah.
Interestingly, I think back to when I was a baby student astrologer, right? So I was in my late teens at the time, and I'd been throughout my teens reading, sun sign astrology books.
Hmm.
And I got a printout. My aunt Shireen gave me a copy of a printout of a natal chart reading, that computer generated reading. And I was so mind blown that, oh my God, this is me on paper. This is incredible. What's
Right.
this? So it was kind of a sort of this huge moment for me that I wanted to learn about charts. And so the first thing I did, of course, was I had to go to the New Age store and I had to ask to order celebrity charts, like the different people I wanted to see. And at the time, the biggest celebrities were Madonna and Oprah. And
Right.
I was fully expecting to see grand trines all over the place.
Right.
Surprise, surprise, I look at these charts, squares, very
Right.
important squares, very precise squares. And
Right.
that's when it really connected with me that, it's the success, the growth, whether it's personal or professional, however that might come forward, that sense of really engaging life, of doing what is required. It's squares that motivate that. It's squares
Right.
that make things happen. And so she was definitely someone who made things happen, including the blessings in her life as well.
Right, right. And it's also fascinating to see that sometimes Sagittarius can go overboard with the Pollyanna-ishness of things, the optimism, the belief, the faith in the future. And by seeing the ruling planet, and for me, the way that I work with the ruling planet is that the ruling planet is the planet that rules your sun sign. It's simple as that. There's different debates and things like that, but I just come forward and say, this is the way I work with it. If it works for you, great. If not, toss it. But to me, the ruling planet is Jupiter, and the Jupiter is in Pisces, and it's in the 8th house. And so, what you have there with Jupiter also ruling over the Venus begins to speak to me about being under the thumb of someone else. And we all know that famously in her marriage with her creative collaborator, Ike, she was. And and what you get there is two meanings from the 8th house. The 8th house we know is a house which is a very difficult house. Probably the most difficult houses in astrology are the 8th and the 12th. And so there can be this feeling of ordeal or difficulty with the 8th house. If you have Jupiter in Pisces, that's going to indicate suffering. Any sort of notion, any sort of planet in Pisces will talk about suffering. It's not something we like to talk about, but there's suffering. And so, and finally, what the 8th house can also be is a feeling of being beholden to someone financially. And that's what I find fascinating here, to see that the Jupiter is in Pisces in the 8th, and that there might have been that she was beholden to him financially, and even though she makes all of the money, it goes to him, and that's something that I think also becomes like a drive. Either she was going to own who she is, or she was going to be beholden to someone else, and when that turned around, when she was no longer beholden to him, she goes and she really gets her voice. She had her voice all along, but she owns her voice. She owns her voice, and I think that that's a very important thing. And with the benefics squaring like that, they questioned the price of good fortune. Benefics will always try to do good, but sometimes if the good is too good, it spoils, or it makes the person too complacent. Whereas, as you pointed out, Nadiya, if the benefics are squaring, there's a dynamism, there's an energizing that takes place. But again, because one of them is coming from Pisces, which can be a very sorrowful and sacrificing sign, it would not have been without sacrifice.
That's so beautifully put. And of course, with Piscean energy, so often the voice art is involved as well. And I think that the fact that her voice was able to be that, it's so multi-layered, so the way in which it evoked such profound emotion, from
Yeah.
within her, I am sure that it was a type of healing in and of itself. She talks about how um, what led to her conversion to Buddhism. Well, a part of it was a friend coming to her with mantras. And essentially, she had gone to a friend and said, I'm in a miserable situation in my marriage. And her friend just sort of said, okay, do this mantra. This is what I do. This is what helps me. And she really got into that sound vibration. She got into
Right.
that, and she credits
Yeah.
that as giving her the strength to get to that moment where she was ready to make the change in a dramatic way. But still, that turning point moment happened. And it's interesting to consider how sound and the sound of her own body resonating from deep within her was a key part of her moving towards her healing, her growth, and her blessings with that Jupiter and Pisces.
Yeah. Do you know if she started out in the church?
I'm
Did she
sure that
start?
she did. I could
Yeah.
have sworn that she did. I'm just having a quick look here at her bio. She's saying here, her sister was a songwriter as young children.
Oh,
It talks about how they were separated. Oh, yes, here it says uh, Woodland Missionary Baptist Church.
okay.
So she was reunited with her siblings, and then they got active in the church. And so it says, as a young girl, there was a church choir as well in their hometown. And so,
Mhm.
yes, that was very much a part of it,
I'm
which makes
fascinated by
sense.
that.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the quick mention of the sister, because didn't you just say that the sister was writing lyrics, or she was
Yes. Yes.
right?
Her sister's a
And we know,
songwriter.
yeah. So we know that with Gemini, that's a sibling, Moon, female sibling. You can get that idea, and that they had been separated, right? The new moon is the moon and sun as separate as you can possibly get. They're the most opposite one
Mhm.
another. I would be fascinated to know that sister story. We don't have time, I'm sure, but that sister story would be of great interest to me. Like, was the sister uh, much older, or what were the circumstances of them being brought back together? That sort of a thing. I wonder if the sister being represented by that moon, whether she might have taken on some kind of supportive, maybe even parental, or something like that. Or I don't know where they are in their age. I'm fantasizing as I look at this chart, but
Of course, though, that's what we do. But her sister's 3 years older than her, and
Mhm.
also passed away not that long ago as well in
Oh,
2010. So her sister
okay,
passed away as well. Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, like it's interesting to consider that sibling connection. I hadn't correlated with the fact that that full moon, and born on a full moon, and a Gemini moon at that, it would be that sense of perhaps even just for a short time, there could be, whether it's a existential or personal feeling of being separate from the siblings, or a literal
Mm,
separation, that
yeah,
some of that might happen. I mean, I know that a Gemini moon would be looking for one's sibling. Like that
of
would be
course.
something important to them. Yeah, to make an emotional connection with someone, they have to
Yeah,
feel like a twin to you.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. So I imagine that was a very, very profound connection. And then you see that there's a Mars. Yeah, there's a Mars moon square. So that might also actually Mars is playing into there's a T mutable T square, no,
Mhm.
between the Mars, the moon, and the sun. So that's
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 very
that's
powerful. That is a
yeah,
lot of power energy right
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
And go ahead.
it's a lot of power energy, and again, I kind of get the flavor of energy she had to grow grow into. I mean, it's one thing to start out bang out of the gun, and that's kind of like how her career begins. And she's already like doing things that a lot of performers from her background weren't doing, and she was very explosive, and moving very, very fast out of the gate. And when you talk about and think about that sacrifice that she ultimately would have to make, which is, by divorcing Ike, breaking up the act, losing all the money, um, also losing the abuse. So I'm sure at that point it was like, this is kind of a no-brainer. That's where you also kind of like see the Saturn and the Aries coming on in as well, because that kind of like, and it's next to the South Node. I mean, it's not really on top of that midheaven, but it's an intriguing placement. It's an intriguing placement to me because that's kind of like with Saturn, it's gonna play into the price that's paid. I know that some people might be like, Christopher, but I always get but Christopher reactions. But I would make a grand trine out of that Saturn and Aries and the Venus and Sagittarius and the ascendant. I think that one could make a case for a grand trine in fire. And grand trines, my experience of them is that they do bestow good fortune, but trines being of the nature of Jupiter, they also bestow protection. So in other words, if you have a good fortune, that good fortune needs to be protected. And what I've seen with grand trines and fire actually is early on in life, there was lack of recognition or drawing the wrong kind of attention. And so they needed that kind of protection in their uniqueness and in themselves to prevail or to endure. A grand trine in water will talk about hardships and emotions. A grand trine in earth will talk about hardships in physical being, in health and wealth, which are the earth elements. Grand trine in air can talk about hardships in relationships. I've yet to see a grand trine that doesn't have its roots in hardship. And that's why it sort of acts in a way as a benevolent shield or a sort of guardian angel, if you will, for the chart. Like there's something that's very special or unique. If you have a grand trine in water, there's strength and emotion. If you have a grand trine in air, there's strength and relationship. Here, there's strength in spirit, because fire is bound to the idea of spirit. She's a Leo rising, so it brings in that sun, and it's really sort of lifting that sun through her life up out of the bottom area of the chart and bringing it on up so that it actually becomes a more commanding force in her life. And so that's how I would kind of read that grand trine in fire for her.
And so her sort of rebirth into her own, coming into her own, her solo career, saying here solo career, early solo career was 76 to 83. And then her real resurgence happens at 83. And I'm thinking, or 1983 rather, that big resurgence, that's her Uranus opposition. That's the age the Uranus opposition happens. Yeah. And so normally what happens in a chart, for those of you out there who are students of astrology, is that Uranus will take about 84 years to go all the way around the chart.
Yeah.
And at some point in the first part of the 40s, sometimes it's 42, sometimes it's 44 or 45, but you'll have Uranus stand across the sky from your natal Uranus. And that tends to be a big moment of breakthrough for people in their lives. In one way or another, they're having some type of breakthrough. The stereotype is getting the sports car, getting the toupee, right? That can be one way it comes out. But another way, right? Well, you don't need that. But but the higher understanding and the higher way to use the Uranus opposition is, you break through to really being yourself. You know that you can be you and you can be out there being you and that you'll be okay. And it is a time when really brilliant ideas come forward and a lot of life force, that spark of life is so strong in a person at the time. And so it makes total sense that she would have this huge resurgence and cultural significance and this massive career that really takes off at the Uranus opposition.
And what was that year again, Carrie?
Oh, yes. It says, okay, so her early solo career is 76 to 83. And so 76, that's when she's starting to have her like Saturn square, right? Which happens in the mid 30s. But her career really takes off in a big way is 1983. And so 1983. So it was just but she would have been 43 years old, approaching
Right.
44. That's the Uranus opposition. Yeah.
Right, right. And we also have the isn't it a Pluto? It might be a Pluto
Pluto in
square.
Scorpio. Yeah, Pluto was in
Yeah.
Scorpio.
Yeah,
Pluto
it
would
had
have
been
reached her sun sort of in the mid part, the later mid part of the 90s is when Pluto actually got to her sun. But it would have been with
Saturn
Pluto.
and Scorpio. They're both in Scorpio in 83, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Pluto and
Exactly.
Saturn are both in the early degrees of Scorpio, squaring that Pluto. And that's something I also, and you know, I feel like you could sort of like use different things to put together your grand trine. You've got this Pluto in Leo, which is trining the sun and owned by the sun. Okay. And then you've got the Venus, which is bringing in the Saturn. So that's how I would construct that. That Pluto is propelling her. I mean, that Pluto's coming from the 12th house. So it's already coming from a difficult place, but it also gives her a sense through the trine of coming alive in difficult places, coming alive in difficult times. I mean, she's got the grit, right,
Hmm.
to to go on through that. But I think it's fascinating that the Pluto and the Saturn would have been following, preceded. You're absolutely right with the Uranus opposition to the Sun. It's breakthrough or breakdown. It's one of the two. But Pluto had also been opposing a couple of years before, had been opposing that Saturn and had been opposing that south node. So this was, I know that her decisions weren't made overnight, and so this, and then it bursts on forth, but it puts her in a place where she can recognize the energy of the Uranus opposition rather than being assaulted by it. I mean, and don't we sort of work with that in humanistic astrology, Nadiya? The idea that a planetary transit can get us, especially with the moderns, it can get us used to an idea because it's slow moving, and it can kind of like acclimate us to or get us used to that energy that's coming through, even if that energy is going to go against everything that we treasure and what we hold. What's kind of wonderful, particularly like with the slower moving planets, is that it gets you used to it. So you can argue back and forth. You can be like, I'm not sure I want to do this, but then, as you go back and forth in that reflection or that incubation or that troubled soul, you become more aware that this is the right choice, and I don't want to do it. I'm frightened of doing it, but it is the right thing to do. I feel that in my soul and my being.
I think that the sun trine Pluto in a chart, I think you just basically summed up what I feel about it as well, which is these people, it may take them a little bit of time to really know what it is that they want to change. You can settle into the ease of the trine, and yet once they make up their mind, they really are unstoppable.
Right.
It is completely, focused completely on. And with a Pluto in the 12th house, she had a very deep reserve of power inside of her, without a
Yeah.
doubt. I mean, it was so profound, so deeply within, that she was able to draw on in order to make these extraordinary rebirths. Like literal rebirths is what happened in her life. I mean,
Yeah.
what is a butterfly coming out of a cocoon but a metaphor for a rebirth, for becoming something else, right? Not just taking another step, but reinvention and a whole other understanding of who you are in the world and who you are for yourself. And she embodied that so strongly. And we see that as a theme in her life. It isn't just a one off thing, but this was something that she did not just over a course of period of time, as you mentioned, but it was like she had the opportunity to really listen to herself and listen to her soul, but the personal strength to follow through on what she was understanding about whom it is that she now is going to be next, even if all the details weren't figured out. That sense of fire bringing confidence in oneself, self trust, speaking of Leo energy, right?
Right.
Leo is often associated with ego, and we think of that as a negative thing, but there's a healthy expression of ego as well, which
Right.
is knowing that you're worthy, Really,
Yeah,
that's it. Knowing that you're worthy for whatever. You're worthy of uh, paying attention to yourself. You're worthy of
yeah,
taking care of yourself. You're
yeah.
worthy of kindness and honoring yourself and being loyal to yourself. And she really grew into that and became a shining example of that.
Yeah. And I think what's also, how I would also see that Pluto is that's an intergenerational Pluto because of its placement in the 12th house. So I would be super duper fascinated to know about who came before in her family, and how much and was her story, did her story have earlier versions? Did her story have earlier tellings with the lives of previous generations in her family? For me, the 12th house is always the skeletons in the family closet. I even play. I like the idea of even applying the idea of epigenetics to 12th house placements. What trauma took place generations before that's been kind of passed down through the family and that comes out. And I would imagine that there is a very powerful story that's told in the previous generations of her family, and that whether consciously or unconsciously, I'd go with consciously, she was drawing from those roots. And she was drawing from those strengths, and she was drawing from those ancestors. That's how I feel about that Pluto on the 12th trining that sun in the fourth.
That's a powerful way to consider it. And you could feel it looking at her, just in the
Yeah,
way that she stood, in the way that she held her power. Her rootedness was so deep in
yeah.
how she stood on stiletto heels, no less.
I
She was,
know, and on a train at one point, right?
right? Dancing like a magnificent centaur on stage, and just the
Love
the
that.
presence of it and the power of it. It was breathtaking to watch. Just not even in person, to watch it on a screen, to watch her on Oprah. Like, that's how I really got to know her, was watching her on Oprah, and the impression that she made, the magnificence that she brought. May it continue to inspire many, many generations to come. No doubt
And
it will.
and that Rolling Stone cover, right? That Rolling
Yes.
Stone cover that I mean, like, you
I'll be sure
don't
to pull
get
that up.
you
Yeah.
don't get a better incarnation of exuberance
Yes.
than
Yes.
that.
Oh, goodness. Well, Tina, we will love you forever. We will miss you
Always.
forever, always. And just thank you for doing so much with this incarnation. We're so grateful to you.
And thank you for touching our lives and animating our hearts.
Yeah. Well, look, as you guys out there can see, Christopher really knows his stuff. He knows about reading a chart. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but Christopher, let me ask you, because I know that you will be coming to Synchronicity University in a matter of weeks. And you guys, there are just a couple weeks left to choose your tuition rate. There's always just $5 a class for this 5-week course with the one and only Christopher Renstrom. And so, can you touch on, you're going to be teaching people how to look at a chart just like you are here now, and the sun is so important to you when you look at a chart.
The sun to me is so important when you look at a chart, and it's to me, when you read for a client, you want to begin with describing their sun sign, because that's who they are. Even if they say, I don't feel like that or whatever all the time, in some way, if you give a full description, they're going to see themselves there, either the self that they identify with, or the self that they're struggling with, or the self that they aspire to be. The course that I'm teaching, which I am just so delighted that I'm teaching, I've always wanted to teach a course like this, and Nadiya, thank you for the wonderful opportunity. um, my course will follow Nadiya's, which is basically, it's about the fundamentals of the chart, a kind of refreshing or reconnecting or rerouting, in that. And my course is just simply titled How I Read a Chart. And what I wanted to do was show you how I read a chart, okay? Not the way to read a chart, how I, Christopher Renstrom, read a chart, because I want you Nadiya Shah or Zella Zelinsky, or Brian Burrows, to read the chart in the way that you're going to read a chart. I think that what's so important with astrology is that you can get caught up in the whys and the hows and what you think is the proper way of reading a chart and techniques and this language, which can be beautiful, but at times can also be Baroque. What you want to do is to bring your voice to the chart. You are an astrologer, and like any sort of author who writes a book, John Grisham novel is not going to be the same thing as an Erica Jong or an Allen Ginsberg novel. It's not going to be the same voice. You've got different voices, you have different books, you have different works of literature, you have different chart interpretation. There's not one way to read a chart. But what I have found is that sometimes people can get lost of, what do I begin with, and what do I bring in, and do I talk about that now, and the choices. And so this will be a course in the way that I read, so you can say like, oh, that's useful. And what I want you to do if you take this course is to take what's useful to you and dump the rest. I'm not telling you, you have to read a chart like this, exactly this point, that point. No, I'm working with the way that I do it and demonstrating it. And if it's something that you're like, oh, that's cool, that's a great idea, wonderful. And if you're just like, I wouldn't do that, fine, but we're going to be having a conversation in the way that we go through the reading of it. And the aim of it is to really bring your voice to your interpretation when you look at a chart, so that you're not without a voice. You're not like dumbstruck when you look at it, when you're not like, oh, I have to figure out this or that, or what was that rule again? So if we sort of like take the basics and we put them into reading. And again, the mission is that you find your voice so you can bring your interpretation to the marvelous and fabulous way that you're going to read an astrological chart.
Well, I'm really looking forward to your course. I love the way you like to take these deep dives into the sun and helping people understand the ascendant as well. One of your books is on the ascendant, Rise and Shine. I really love that book of yours. And the other book, Cosmic Calendar, I love that book as well. And so I think it's going to be an incredible course to join. And once again, you guys, synchronicityuniversity.com. That's where you can learn more and sign up now. And Christopher, thank you. I adore you. I love you. You are just such a brilliant light. And I just love sharing space and time with you.
I love jamming with you on the chart.
I know, right? We have a lot of fun together for sure. And now we're going to turn off the camera, and it's really going to get spicy and salty and sweet and caramel and all of that good stuff. Oh. Thank you again, Christopher. And thank you everybody out there for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.